All right, welcome to another episode of Duck It. Today we have Badr Ward from Lamsa. How are you?
Hey, Chris, I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Long time. Really happy that we got a chance to do this.
I can't remember the last time we met physically.
I think you were having an event in your offices and you were showing off how awesome your company and your team and your brand is. And that was the last time I saw you in person. That
Really,
was
I
like
think we met a few years
2016.
after that in Dubai,
Really?
probably. Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Sorry, man. It's been such a long time that, and the world has changed. It's on its head now, so nothing makes sense anymore. On that note, Lamsa, I would love to understand the story behind that and the mission behind it. I'm a father now, so things have changed. I have a 2-year-old. Today was her first day in daycare. So
Oh,
it's a big
wow.
day for me because it was closed until today, until this Sunday. They finally opened today. Today we dropped her off for the first time. She was a champion. So now Lamsa means a world of a difference to me, and I think I understand it differently. So I just want to hear from your perspective, why Lamsa and what was the mission behind
First, congratulations on
it? Thank you.
your kid in school, man. That's awesome. How do
Thank
you
you.
feel as parents? Did you feel like
It's
you
nerve-wracking,
anxious?
man. But she was like a champion. She's like, okay, bye. And she just walked away. And she didn't cry. She didn't even look back. So really, really cool. But super, super proud of her.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
I'll say it in Arabic, عقبال الجامعة إن شاء الله.
Inshallah, man. Inshallah.
So
Akid.
yeah, so just to go back to your question, so similar to your big day today, Lamsa really started at home for me. My daughter, who's 13 years old now, Juri, and my son, who's 11 years old, as they were the age of your daughter today, they saw me as as a father having all these devices at home. I've been in tech even before that, so I noticed this sense of intuitivity or like attraction between children and this device, the smartphone or the tablet, and just kept observing how they interact with the device. What it catches their attention, and just looking at what they're doing and how they're engaging with the device so naturally and so organically. I said there's something in there. At the same time, my family and I decided that we want to teach our kids in Arabic, and we want them to develop not just know how to read and write in Arabic, but we wanted them to develop as humans in Arabic, embracing the Arabic culture, the Arabic values, and learning everything else in Arabic itself. So we couldn't find anything that actually did that, and so I decided, let's attempt doing that, and found out later that it's a much bigger problem. So it really got inspired by my own kids, and then once we started digging into it, we realized that it's there's over 120 million Arabic kids that suffer from the same challenge, or that have this gap in their lives, and their parents are looking for something, and so we decided to solve it.
It's incredible that we can be sitting in the Middle East and say there is a gap in trying to learn Arabic for kids, right? It's such a strange thing to say that if you think about it.
Chris, it's I spend a lot of time educating people around the world why we have this issue, and it's really a big dilemma. I mean, all over the Middle East, parents are suffering and complaining about their kids not being able to understand or interact with them in Arabic, and it's just it's honestly very sad. But the good news is we're trying to do something about it.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I mean, for a long time, I've always believed in the power of language, not just to preserve and understand your culture and your heritage, which is true to I think both of our families, but when you understand and you speak a different language and you have different definitions for different words and you have different vocabulary, the way your brain works is different. The way you think, the way you engage, the way you understand is different. So I'm a firm believer that language, be it Arabic, French, English, German, Spanish, etc., the more of them you know, the more of them you master, the more developed your brain and the more opportunity you can create for yourself. Not to mention just being in the Middle East and speaking Arabic. Um, so it's really interesting. Do you think that the gap today in terms of kids' education in Arabic is a curriculum problem that hasn't evolved. Where did that gap stem from, in your opinion? I have my own interpretations, but
Sure. Before I get to that, so you mentioned something really interesting about the brain development. So as we started Lamsa, we kind of got into the field. We started developing content and the platform that allows kids to get access to early childhood development content in Arabic. But along the way, we have really studied how the brain of the child works, and I'd just like to share a few things for you as a young parent. So the early years really matter. So the first 5-6 years of a child's or a human's life is probably the most important 5-6 years of their entire lives. And we've done a lot of research, and research shows that the brain architecture develops in the most rapid time in those years. So imagine that your 2-year-old daughter at the moment has the ability to create up to 1,000 neural connections per second in her mind. So that's per second, multiplied by 60, multiplied by the number of minutes and hours and day. So what's happening with those neural connections, Chris, is that the child is forming the brain architecture, which science and research tells us that it's responsible for the lifelong results. So their education, their well-being, their success depends on the first 6 to 8 years of their lives. And what's interesting about this period in human development is that it's a chance that never comes again. So there's this opportunity only comes once. And then after that, the brain development or the neural connections development start reducing in terms of speed. So yes, you can teach children any language at that time. You can teach them anything. And it's much faster and it's extremely rapid in terms of development. And then after that, it just starts going down. And that's why, picking up a new language when you're a kid is much easier, because you're actually, your brain is so active building those neural connections, and you can learn anything. Actually, studies have shown that, sometimes we say that we don't want to give kids multiple languages because we don't want to confuse them. But on the contrary, studies have shown that there's no impact on, teaching. A child will be better in one language if you teach them. They can absorb as many languages as we give them as adults. So I'm extremely passionate about the early childhood, and I think as a society, as a region, as just the world, as humans, if we really want to make the world a better place, we need to start focusing on the first years of children, and that's where really we can make a big difference. I understand that, talking to parents, ministers, ministries, schools, a lot of people focus at, think about children while they're going to high school or university and think, that's where I want to really focus on my child. But if science shows and research that if we focus on the early years, it actually is much, much better than focusing on the later years. Because if the foundation is not right, most probably things are not going to look okay later on. To answer your question about curriculums and where the gap is with the Arabic language, I think it's partially due to globalization, Chris. So we as let's say young parents, most of us got taught in our mother language. So I was brought up in Arabic. I don't know, what language were you brought up in, like at home?
In French.
Okay, so you were brought up in French. I was brought up in Arabic. But then look, we're talking English now. We deal with English speaking people all over the world, and we do things, and we're okay. We're not bad, right? But then our culture, our values are very, very kind of like set in stone with the language and the culture that we were brought up in.
Sure.
And just to tell you an interesting fact, that the research shows that actually if you get taught in a home language and you preserve that culture and you learn English or any other language as a secondary language, you will actually outperform others that come from
Really?
yes, that come from. So let's say you've got an Arabic family that the parents' education was in Arabic, their culture was in Arabic, everything they know is in Arabic. But then, for the sake of globalization or making their kids smarter, they decide that, hey, you know what? We're going to teach our kids only English and not focus on and have them isolated from their mother language and the values at home that the parents were brought up with. They actually perform worse than kids that get brought up with a strong foundation of their home language and home culture and then learn the second language. So this is not my research. This is public research that's available. And it has to do a lot with how the brain, Chris, is designed. The brain is a beautiful masterpiece. It's like it's got four main components: language, cognitive, motor, and social emotional. And they're wired in a way that they develop together, right? So if you disconnect or isolate the child from their heritage, their values, their identity, you'll start seeing impact on their confidence. And then once that confidence compartment is affected, it starts affecting their language development and so many other things. So a lot of parents, Arabic-speaking parents, think that they're doing their kids a favor by just teaching them English, but that's not actually the case. And you can see that as someone that lives in this part of the world, you'll see that a lot of our kids don't speak very good Arabic, but also don't speak very good English. It's like the Yalla Habibi, this culture of like you have those 10 words and you'll just, manage your entire conversation with these 10 words, not perfecting any language in terms of proficiency. And so it goes back. So it's just to kind of answer your question. So it goes back to parents, and we think that, English is a more global language. It is a global language, but we think by empowering our kids with that language much earlier, they have a higher chance of succeeding, and that's not scientific. And then the schooling system. So some of the Arabic countries, in terms of public systems, have chosen English to teach maths and sciences and all of these things, while the home education is happening in Arabic. So it's quite controversial, and even from a results perspective, it's not very evident which are these kind of systems doing kids any good or the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting. I think one big thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm super curious to get your kind of position on this, is I'm a marketing, I'm a brand guy, right? I believe in brands and the power of brands, and I really believe in the power of brands, especially in the influence and impact it has on kids, right? And so, when my daughter says she wants to watch Boss Baby or Sesame Street or Cocomelon or whatever that show is, and the fact that she remembers it, sings along to it, and that brand has been so anchored into her brain already, that's one thing I've always really admired about Lamsa, is that you guys always put a lot of effort in the creativity of the experience as well. And you created your own content, your own production, your own identities, everything in the house, and you tried to make it fun and look modern and of age, versus, I'm not going to say what I went to school with in terms of Arabic content, but I always admired that. But what do you think the role is in creating those brands, those characters, those stories, and the creativity, or the role of creativity in edutainment, in your opinion?
So that's a very good question, Chris, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's actually a very complex question that you asked me, and I'm going to try to answer it in different ways. So sure. Building IP and content is extremely difficult, especially when you compete with the brands that you just mentioned. So it's we as the region don't have the foundations and all the ingredients that it takes to build these things. So we at Lamsa, for example, had to bring people from outside the region, people that have worked with major companies and major IPs to come here and help us build these IPs. So that's from one side. It's like the industry itself, the creative industry, when we started was not as mature as it is today, and it still requires a lot of more work to be in par with the global industry. The second thing is education. Education, as we all know, is quite outdated. Our education systems globally are quite outdated. Whether it's what's being offered in school or even outside of school as enrichment or complementary or supplementary studies. So trying to bring something, and this is where it was really difficult at Lamsa at the beginning, where it's like you're trying to create an industry like IP, content creation, characters, that it's already extremely difficult to do in this region. Yeah. And then trying to bring something that's extremely obsolete and quite boring, and trying to mix those two together has not been easy, I must say. But we're driven by passion and the true belief that in order to get kids to study or to learn something, the children today are much more empowered than we were when we were kids, Chris. Our parents used to be able to put us in a room and say, here, finish the book, don't come out until you're done. Today, we can't do that with our kids, right? They're much, they have their own zone, they're much more empowered, and they have access to a lot of things. So our philosophy has been, we wanted to make education fun and an experience that is both personalized and fun, so that the child him or herself will continue that journey without the parent forcing them to. Now, of course, the parent needs to trust the platform or wherever they're going. So that's why we look at our segment as having two different audiences: the parent being the user, and the kind of the customer, and the child being the person that's actually using and experiencing the content and the experiences that we build. And honestly, Chris, it took us a while to figure out that we have two different audiences. A lot of our friends in the industry that have a single audience, the customer is the same as the user. Yeah. I guess it's much more straightforward for them because you have one persona. But for us, we had to figure out this persona and that we have two audiences to talk to. One is the user and one is the parent. So at the end we said, let's design something that parents trust and kids love. So that's something that we it's a motto for us, that whatever we do, it needs to have the parents trust and kids love. And with regards to the characters, I think what helped us was we designed the two hero characters of Lamsa based on real life kids, which are my kids. So the Juri, who's the lead character in Lamsa, is designed based on my daughter, and Adam is based on my son. So we actually got these two kids to the studio, and we had the creative team, artists, animators, just study them for days and weeks and months. And they used to come in every weekend, every holiday, and the reactions of these characters are based on real life reactions. So what Adam does, like Adam likes broccoli in real life, so you'll see Adam eating broccoli in the cartoons or in the characters. So I think that helped us a lot by having like real life kids, and we take them and we put them into this digital world where kids can actually relate to them. So that's been fun, Chris.
I mean, I guess the reason I brought it up is, I live in a world of brands too, right? And building those IPs and building that equity and being able to compete with, global brands locally is still very difficult. I mean, whether it was Kareem and Uber or Noon and Amazon or, OSN and Netflix, throughout my career, there's always been that Goliath kind of, lurching over your shoulder, and you're just trying to, build your equity. So it's super interesting to see that carries over almost in every industry, and even more so in what you do. And you're right. I think the distraction is immense. for kids these days, and trying to get that focus, that attention is that much more difficult. So kind of, I applaud you on kind of taking that challenge. I think that's quite amazing.
Thank you, Chris. And I just wanted to add to that point, because you mentioned your kids referring to wanting English shows. Imagine we've done the small research and shows that kids would ask their parents to watch shows that are even not in English nor any of the languages that are spoken at home, right? And that was mind-blowing. It's like kids actually don't really look at the language that the content is delivered, and a lot of times they are able to understand what's the message that this character is trying to give. And the visuals play a big role, and the quality. So with us at Lamsa, you have to take all these factors in and build something that can grab the kids' attention in comparison with everything that's out there globally. And I think we've done okay with that. And a testament to that was, I don't think I've shared the story before. It's like at some point we launched our own theater shows that were educational, similar to what you would see with Barney and stuff. And when the characters came out on stage, and the mascots, like those puppets, kids were crying. They knew their name. They were so happy to see them. And then we had this red carpet moment where kids would line up for hours just to take pictures with the mascots that we've created. And because we work in the digital space, you don't usually see those physical human reactions and kids screaming and crying and just grabbing the characters and waiting for hours to take pictures. So I think that was like an aha moment for us. It was like, oh wow, we've created something that works, something that kids really can connect to and admire. And I think that was one of the proud moments at Lamsa.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Super. I think I would love to kind of be a part of that sort of product and experience. I've always been kind of very transactional brands, you know what I mean? So I think being able to have that physical interaction and see the emotion that people feel behind what you do is super unique.
You're welcome to come on this side, Chris, anytime.
Yeah.
Me and you have been doing stuff together over the years, so it's never too late, Chris.
Yeah. Why not, man? Why not? Even if it's a little project, I'd be happy to play a role.
Absolutely, man.
Cool. I'm gonna take you up on that, man. I wanted to ask you, how do you think about the recipe of edutainment in a kid's development? Like, what is the role of Lamsa in a kid's development? Because they're gonna go to daycare or school. They're going to have some sort of extracurricular kind of activities or courses, et cetera, or tutors. How do you see the role of Lamsa in all that? Like where does Lamsa stand?
There's the pre-COVID answer and there's the post-COVID.
Let's go with post-COVID.
The post-COVID, the way that we see it is, things will never go back to normal or the new normal. We're defining, all of us are trying to define the new normal for different sectors. We think for education, it's one of the most impacted sectors globally. And, all of us feel that, whoever has kids around them. So for us, post-COVID, the new norm is we're trying to take Lamsa to another level at the moment. So the way that we envision Lamsa being in the near future is that it is a truly a personalized experience, helping every child develop according to their areas of strength, their areas, their interest area, their passion areas. So we're working on, we've been doing a lot of work throughout COVID, where we set a lot of research initiatives and mandates, and now we're starting to see the manifestations of those in a way that every child that interacts with Lamsa will have an extremely customized journey, looking at everything that the child needs to learn in that age and progressing through those different skills in life, whether it's, as I mentioned before, it's primarily 4 areas. It's cognitive, everything to do with the mind, language, motor, and social emotional development. So we've taken all these 4 components of the brain and we've dissected them and put them into frameworks, and we started running algorithms on them to see, how we can engage with every child differently and feed them with the right skills, knowledge, and education that they need along the way. And the easiest way to think about this, Chris, is if you are lucky enough and you're part of society that can afford to pay a lot of money, you can put your kids in a very, very good kindergarten. And what will happen there is you'll have a good ratio of teachers to students and good content and good technology and different things, where every teacher can grab a student and understand your daughter's areas of passion, strength, areas of weakness, and then build a plan with your daughter individually, and you'll start seeing progress by the day.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, that costs a lot. That's very expensive, almost to a point where it's more expensive than university in some places. And what we're trying to do with this research that we've been doing and all of this work that we've been doing is we're trying to democratize that, Chris. So basically, just democratizing access to high quality early childhood development, right? In a way that just like every human should have health insurance or a health system that supports their physical needs as they grow, Lamsa will become the child development insurance in a way that, as long as you're using Lamsa, your child is developing in the correct way, according to research, just like they would develop if they're put into a proper kindergarten, which has the best methodologies, the best teachers from around the world.
And that's personalization through technology, right? It's not access to teachers or instructors or that sense. What you're saying is, how do you turn that into a scalable, democratic technology experience, digital experience platform?
It's all ethic. So it's an ethic play. So we're using the power of technology to bring education in a very personalized manner to every child in a different way, but using and leveraging the power of the content that we've built over the years, right? So we're combining technology with education, with content, and we think there is something in there.
Okay. And so what you're basically saying in this new era today, post-COVID or during COVID, that Lamsa is your educational experience.
Absolutely. Lamsa is your educational experience, and to a point where we've been contacted by a lot of educational systems and bodies around the region saying, help us. And so we're looking at this as kind of like a three-way relationship between educational systems, the household, and Lamsa, where we all complement each other and support the educational process. And the beauty about this is we're building it in a way that's scalable worldwide. So language is not, it's language agnostic, Chris. So we haven't seen a global case implementing exactly what we're working on. So we think that this will become a global play rather than just a MENA play.
Super interesting. And okay, so then you are basically aggregating the education experience into one edtech platform under the Lamsa kind of ethos, and using that content. And then the idea is that Lamsa becomes the education rather than the complementary to the education.
Absolutely, for early childhood development, yes.
Man, that's amazing. That's amazing.
It's ambitious, but we're very passionate and very dedicated. So we're gonna do it, Chris.
Lamsa as a project in itself was extremely ambitious. So wow, man, good for you. That's amazing.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask you, so is there a way that the region measures Arabic proficiency per capita? Like, is there a way like to see that, okay, our generation versus our kids' generation, if Arabic proficiency is something that we've maintained or that is improving or is declining? Is there a measure of that in the region or nationally for every country?
I'm not aware of something as such. I've spoken to a lot of experts, a lot of bodies, and I don't think there's any indicator that shows us officially how Arabic development or language development or proficiency is or the state of that. But unfortunately, from all the experts we work with, there's an unofficial kind of indicator that everything's going down, right, in terms of language proficiency, and specifically in Arabic. So reading levels, comprehension levels, all of that's going down. And this is not officially public or published by any entity, but it's, we work with hundreds of top language specialists around the region, and everywhere we ask, it's, there's a general consensus that it's going down. And that's why we're also working on a new system that will potentially help the Arab world with that. It's so basically there's a big, just to explain the other part of the dilemma is that there is the classic Arabic, and then there is the dialects. And so proficiency in classic Arabic is going down, proficiency in dialects or use of in dialects is going down. So Arabic in general is going down, and we as the sector need to do something about it. And I think there's a lot of movements happening, which is great. But at Lamsa specifically, we're working on an attempt to actually enhance how children engage with Arabic in a fun manner.
I read somewhere that somewhere over, and this was a few years ago, so please nobody quote me and hold me to this stat, but somewhere over 95% of the content online is English, and then followed by Russian, and then followed by Chinese, right? And then Arabic is probably 0.0000001% of that or something, when you look at the global content online. And when you think that everything is online, and people's lives are online, and you were talking about kids being attracted to devices, it just leads me to believe that, doesn't the action need to be a bit more radical? And I'll give you an example. I was brought up in a French household because my mother is French Canadian, right? So she's from Quebec City. And so in our house, even though I grew up in Saudi Arabia, by the way, we still spoke French at home because my mother was adamant, right? But also when I look at Quebec as a province in North America, a continent that is, large majority English speaking, of course, with the US and Canada, Quebec adopted, a bunch of laws and policies that protected the language, right? So for example, because both my parents were educated in French, by law, I had to go to a French school if I went to school in Quebec. Right. By law, every government, every organization, every corporate, private, business, etc., had to operate in French, right, etc. So there was educational policies, there was corporate policies, there was many policies put in place to protect the language, and they had this law called La Loi 101 that protected the language. All signage, all content, everything had to be in French. Schooling, your kids had to go to French school, had to learn French, etc., etc., etc. Now, here in this part of the world, the Middle East seems to have a very lenient policy when it comes to language. Nothing is mandated. Even if both your parents went to an Arabic school, you could still go to a school in the language of your choice, right? Which is great for globalization, but maybe not so good for the conservation of our culture and language. Don't you sometimes think that you're a small player in a very big problem, and that you're the only one going counter current, and that maybe it needs more robust support from a legislation kind of point of view?
So I'll just start off by saying Quebec is an exception. Like always, Quebec does these awesome things, and but they are quite an exception.
Sure.
But yeah, look. So there's in Arabic, what you referred to as the volume of Arabic content online that surpasses 95. It's anywhere between 1% to 5%, depending on the research that you look at, is true. And I think in general, Chris, we always use that as an excuse in the industry by saying, people don't like to read or consume Arabic content. I actually have an opposite theory. I actually have a theory that we as creators of content and Arabic media have not been creating enough high quality content for people to consume. And I'll just give you a small example. Like a lot of households watch, TV on these channels that, even on Netflix, actually, the shows in English, the movies in English, but then we turn on the Arabic subtitles, although we're all proficient English speakers, but it's just, there's something there that attracts you to kind of like, just read, or even it started before Netflix and the kind of video on demand. It was on when it was on TV.
Yeah.
Subconsciously, you start reading. And when you ask people, why do you do that? You understand English. They say, I don't know. I just feel like it's, I feel like that language is pulling me. And if you think about it, if you come to an Arabic household and you give them this equal quality in terms of production in Arabic and in English or any other language, believe me, they would choose Arabic. And we've seen it when there is really good movies or shows or content or books that are produced in Arabic, people will consume them. But there isn't enough of this high quality, and it's for a reason. It's expensive, Chris, and that's where it goes back to your point. It's bigger than just one company. Like, we need to move together as an ecosystem to preserve this culture and the language and the values associated with it, right?
Yeah.
But we can't. You look at Anghami and what they're doing in the music or in the entertainment. You look at different platforms and what each one is doing. I think each one has a role to play, and together we kind of are doing a difference. It might not be, as you said, like as fast as mainstream or big supported movements can move, but I think there is progress.
No, I agree. I think when you started saying Anghami, and I thought, okay, there's Anghami, there's Lamsa, there's Shahid, like there's more and more. Like 5-10 years ago, there was nothing, right? I mean, I don't want to anger anybody, but I don't feel that there was anything competing, at least digitally, right?
I'll give you another example. Like there's this platform that everyone knows called TikTok, right? So TikTok is used for different entertainment consumption or media consumption. We've actually recently started using TikTok and partnered up with TikTok to create Arabic content to educate parents about early childhood development, about parenting, and we've actually just in a few weeks we've gotten over 60-70 million views just by launching small parenting tips on TikTok with the support and great support of the team at TikTok Arabia. So that's a small example, right? Yes, we are, we are a small company, but then when you do content that resonates with people, in just a few weeks you can reach, almost 100 million views. That's impact, right?
It's amazing, and it shows you not only the impact, but it shows you the demand, right? It shows you the opportunity, it shows you the thirst for that content, right? Which is comforting to some extent, right? To know that it's there, that it can compete.
Absolutely.
And it's super interesting that you say that. It almost feels like when you look at TikTok, it's kind of like a proof of concept in the sense that you have a mainstream platform, super mainstream, and that typically doesn't associate really to a language, right? If you think about it, because it's based on kind of, musical interpretations of whatever, right? It's very kind of agnostic to a language. And it's funny, now that you say it, when I go on TikTok, I feel that I'm consuming way more Arabic content than anywhere else. And that's just by natural selection. It doesn't happen. I think it's based on recommendation and what's relevant and where I am and what I've engaged with. But it just shows you that naturally, if given a chance, Arabic content can penetrate, right? It can resonate. So that's super, super interesting. I think it's a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, TikTok is a language agnostic, and it's also a genre agnostic. Like, you could be talking about anything like exercise or sports or cooking. So, and you see, like the moment you open that platform, which probably everyone's using now in society, you'll see that there's different content and different, verticals and different lifestyles.
Yeah.
And honestly, the Arabic content is doing not bad. And it's because, and maybe it's because the new generation or the younger people are starting to create cooler content,
Yeah.
which
Play a
connects
huge
with
role.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's on us. I think we as the industry, we as people that are creating content, have to up the game and really compete with all other languages, let alone the fact that we have to do that for education as well. Because look, Chris, you leave a child with a device, and if you'll find him playing on a game, right? So you need to compete in order for education, in order for our kids to be well educated, for them to love learning. Education needs to also be in terms of high quality, in terms of experience, engaging, gamified, and I think that's a big responsibility on us as creators.
I completely agree. Completely agree. I think it's something I also live with on a regular basis in terms of our ethos as a company as well as DUCKLIFE is that we always want to create brands that we're proud of, that have a positive impact somehow. And so being able to conserve our culture, our language, our values, etc., is something that's super, super important. I wanted to ask you, and this is maybe a harder one to answer, and I don't know if you'd agree or not, but I grew up in a world where mobile phones only started to exist and were cool when I was probably end of high school, right? And even then, if you had one, it's because your parents were super lenient and easygoing with you, or you were this the cool rich kid, and if you had a phone, oh my god. I look at kids nowadays. I live in a compound. I'm not going to name the compound, but I live in a compound now, and there's nobody playing outside. Right? There's really like apart from what happened last night with Halloween, normally the streets are empty, right? And it makes me super, super sad, right? It makes me sad that I feel like they're missing out. I feel like whatever games they're playing, video games they're playing, social media platforms they're kind of engaging on. Okay, it's cool. I also think those things are cool, and Fortnite is pretty cool. Anybody can get addicted to it, but it kind of makes me feel like I used to rollerblade or play basketball or play football for hours. Like the only reason I would come home is because I had to eat. I kind of feel that there's this really fine line between kind of advancing society with endless education and content and knowledge and digital experiences, and also like living in the real world. What's kind of your position? I guess here you're wearing two hats. You're wearing Lamsa hat and you're wearing kind of like a dad hat. What's your position on that, and what's the role of Lamsa to do it in a responsible way?
I'll start with my answer wearing the hat of a father. So both of my kids don't have nor an iPhone or an iPad or any phone. And
Wow.
They are 11 and 13. My daughter, she's going to kill me if she hears this. She's probably the only 13-year-old in the entire country that does not have a phone. And it's for exactly the reason that you mentioned. My kids, you'll see them all day long on their bike, their skateboard, in the park. They'll be the only kids in the park, just lying down on the grass, climbing the trees, and like doing everything that we used to do as kids. And I'd like to maintain that as long as I can, right? Eventually eventually I'll have to give up on that, like once probably she goes to university or something. But for now, I'm trying to push back as much as I can. That does not mean we don't have devices at home, especially post-COVID. So pre-COVID, we had one central device where they can have access to it for 20 minutes a day, right?
Yeah.
Now, post-COVID, what we did was, because they have to sit, and until now, for like, I don't know, 8-9 hours on a device. So we got them, uh, machines, like not laptops even,
Yeah.
or iPads. We got them like a full Mac, and they have to sit there and study in the study room, right?
Yeah.
But the concept that a child will take the phone and put their head there and just spend hours and hours, in this isolated environment, I'm completely against as a parent. Now, talking about, from a point of view of Lamsa, the idea is, um, there is a certain amount of minutes or time that a child can use the device or should use the device to learn something, right? And what we want to do is capture that time, right? We don't encourage using Lamsa for the entire day, uh, uh, just turning your whole life into a digital screen. But while you're on the screen, would rather that you spend it with Lamsa than on other things. And let me be a little bit more honest with that. So parents across probably the Arab world and probably around the world have started using devices as digital pacifier, Chris, and you've probably seen that, right? So you go to a restaurant, you see parents just plugged in an iPad in front of a 2-year-old or even a 1-year-old child. And while the parents are conversing, leaving that child there, you go to a plane, or we used to go to planes, and you see the same thing.
Yeah.
All around us, you'll see that
Crazy.
parents use phones and smart and tablets as digital pacifiers. So what we say is the following, and this is how we think about it. If parents are going to give their kids the devices anyways, they can do one of two things. Either spend it watching, just one-way cartoons with no interactivity, or play violent games that are not educational. And this is where Lamsa comes in. Lamsa, as long as that, the child's on Lamsa, we're giving them an alternative which does not have any violence, which is completely safe, but also adds value to them and helps them engage and interact. And everything at Lamsa is very engaging and interactive. So yes, we don't promote the use of technology for a very long period of time for children, but to be very, very honest, if they're gonna spend it anyways, we'd rather they spend it on Lamsa for their own sake, rather than anything else.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I just find it increasingly scary. COVID has accelerated the adoption of digital everything, and now education, to me, and school and that physical interaction was kind of like the last kind of island of hope for physical engagement for kids. And so, today, for example, I dropped off my daughter, Charlotte, and my wife did. And we're so excited because she's finally going to be in a classroom full of children, right? Which hadn't happened for, since she was born, right? So she would, if it wasn't for COVID, she would have been in school since at least probably the latest by September, right?
But I think there's two things that are happening. One is, I'm seeing this with all young parents who have young kids. I think COVID has actually helped with a lot of child development, because your daughter and your wife has spent such an amazing quality time with your daughter at an age where she requires it the most.
Yeah.
And that, from what I've seen around me, that has actually quadrupled the development of the child, because children pick up from the vocabulary, from the language, from the conversation. 100%. There's a concept called serve and return. This is how their brain is built. So with every serve that your daughter was doing, you were returning a reaction, and that just accelerated the growth of this entire generation of kids that got stuck with their parents at home. So that had actually
had a huge,
and you will see this. Research will, and I am a strong believer that research will show us in a few years that this generation that spent 6 months with their parents, given of course that their parents were educated and mindful and empathetic and
Taking the time to take care of them. Yeah.
exactly. Now, the other point that I wanted to make is I think schools or social interactions in educational communities will transform to be exactly for that only or primarily. So I don't think there's any going back from digital learning, right? Because everyone wants to be ready for whatever happens. So, and we've seen the ministries make similar announcements saying that we're never going to drop a digital learning, even if we go back to classrooms.
Yeah.
But I think, and I've been saying this for a few years, I think the role of the teacher will remain super important to have that develop the social emotional aspects of children within a classroom or a group setting, right? And I think computers will never replace that, will never be able to replace that, or should never be able to replace human interactions, empathy, emotions, confidence. And I think that's where we're gonna see products like Lamsa will cover the learning bit, right? And the progression and just looking at how your child's developing, and will actually help teachers say, oh, Chris, there is, Charlotte's, we've noticed that Charlotte needs a push in this kind of domain or a push in this skill. And then you as a parent can emphasize, or then the teacher can help Charlotte develop that specific skill.
Yeah.
So it's just part of the evolution of education, I think, or parenting in general, Chris.
Yeah, super interesting. Time will tell. Right now, I'm super curious, like you, to see what happens and how these COVID kids, are going to be measured and how their performance is based on their experiences. We've been talking for about 45 minutes. I have one final question for you, if you don't mind. I really wanted to ask you this, and I think the timing is perfect. So we began the interview or the conversation by saying and agreeing that education needs to be democratized, needs to be unleashed, needs to be accessible, needs to be kind of a right that's not impacted by social classes or what have you. Now, the world kind of most of the time agrees on two kind of, I would say, areas being accessible and democratized, and that's healthcare and education, right? No matter which kind of society you look at, all governments or all countries have at least, to some extent, developed private and public systems for both, and said that in the public system it's either free or highly subsidized, and the private system, if you want to pay extra, there are also facilities. Now Lamsa is not an NGO. It doesn't, it's not a nonprofit. It's a private company, private business that offers a better learning experience in Arabic for kids. What's your, I guess, personal view, rather than your CEO hat, but what's your personal view on that, specifically in the scenario that Lamsa generally could prove to be a better contributor to the conservation and development of Arabic and Arabic culture and Arabic content for our kids in our generation? What do you think the role should be? Because if now you're not complementary to education, but you are education, shouldn't the business model change? Shouldn't your clients maybe be the government, right? Or shouldn't there be a version of your product be subsidized or paid for by the government, right? What's your position on that?
So to go back to the root of the question, I think you said, there's two sectors that no one can disagree on, that they should be democratized: healthcare and education. But early childhood development, Chris, is a new field to government. So it's only in the last 10 to 20 years have the entire world, it started with the United Nations, kind of saying early childhood development is a right. Okay. Prior to that, it was the rights of children were clean water, shelter, food, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In the United Nations, they ratified this motion by saying and including it in the SDGs, specifically SDG number 4, 4.2, saying, you know, every child should have access to early childhood development or early education. And that has kind of, you know, then transpired into massive projects with government saying, oh, we have to focus on children. And then research started, and then, you know, longitude research started kind of saying, what are the benefits of investing into early childhood development, to a point where one of the research came out with saying in the US that $1 we invest in society can have an ROI of $17 on society if we invest it in early childhood development, right? So that's massive. And that's how you build a society. Now, even with everything that I said, if you look at all systems across the world, early childhood development is still super early, to a point where most governments around the world are still building the physical schools of kindergartens. They're worrying about, you know, accessibility to an infrastructure. And this is where Lamsa is kind of like taking a lead. We're saying, okay, since we don't need a physical space, so we don't need to worry about building thousands of schools, let's focus on the brain of the child. What is it that we need to develop? And unlike the secondary schooling or the high school or the universities, there is no global best practice or curriculum that says this is the global standard for developing a child up to grade 1 or 2, right? Anything before that, it's kind of like there's different smaller systems, right, around the world. So we have actually developed the first attempt to, you know, standardize this and come out with a framework that says, based on all the research that's out there, saying this is what a child should learn. And we have created content that maps to all of these learning objectives and learning outcome. And we're plugging that into a bigger computer that can then help children progress through these things in a very personalized way. Now, so that's when I said this is a global product, right? So, and this is what I'm saying, that is usually a product that you can only get by paying tens of thousands of dollars a year. With Lamsa, what we're trying to do is, and when I say democratizing that, is with a small amount, just like what you would pay to watch movies, or with, you know, what you would pay to have a simple meal outside. Whoever can afford it can have access with a small subscription fee to this entire system that would cost thousands of dollars per year, right? Now, in cases where you asked, the second part of your question is, what if there is developing countries that even an average consumer cannot pay those few dollars a month? What do we do? And honestly, we've had a few good examples where we worked actually throughout the last few years. We worked with foundations that are backed up by certain governments to deliver early childhood development to countries and children that cannot afford it. So we've done programs. Up until now, we've worked with at least 250,000 kids that could not afford Lamsa, but, you know, by working with foundations and certain governments that were keen to deliver education to those people. There's always a way, Chris. There's always a way. As long as the intention is right, as long as what we're doing is scientific, research-based, we'll always find a way to deliver content to children in a way that serves their early childhood years.
I think I respect the answer 100%. Don't misinterpret it. It's just that I feel sometimes that, you know, when you say 10 to 20 years being a short period of time, in today's world, 10 or 20 years is a lifetime based on the speed of technology and how quickly you can impact society and how quickly you can change things. I think the accessibility of Lamsa is definitely not comparable to a school. I think you're absolutely right. Like tuition fees versus, you know, the subscription fee that you have are not comparable. And definitely what you guys do is way more accessible than anything else in a physical form, let's say. So I completely agree. I'm just thinking of, you know, what is the role of institutions, of government bodies, in terms of enabling and improving the awareness and accessibility and adoption of these types of platforms and tools, Lamsa and others, because their power is tremendous, right? Their impact can be phenomenal. I mean, speaking of foundations and stuff like that, it's no secret that in the Middle East, if you look at the UNHCR kind of mandate, and you look at the refugees, just Middle Eastern refugees, just take the Syrian refugee crisis, you take Palestinians, you take Sudan, you take any Arabic speaking or Arabic speaking regions, we have by far the highest concentration of refugees globally, right? There's 75 million refugees in the world, give or take, and about 12 million of them are just in the Middle East, right? So there's a huge kind of potential of wasted talent, let's just call them, and so they're not necessarily recognized as citizens. They're not allowed to participate in society like other kids. They don't have access to education, etc. So I'm just wondering, what is the role sometimes of these government bodies for citizens or non-citizens in their countries to have these sorts of accesses? And I respect your answer. I'm just wondering, is there more that these policies and regulations?
Thank you for sharing that. So the programs, like the 250,000 kids that we worked with, were actually children affected by the refugee crisis, right? So we have done work in that field. We'll continue to do work, and there are major bodies and foundations that support that. But I think, Chris, what you'll see now over the next few months and years is, yes, you said 10, 20 years is a long time in today's world, right? But then the shock of COVID will accelerate a lot of these things, because, and we have been in discussions over the last few months through COVID with very top individuals across a lot of Arabic governments in the education sector. And all of a sudden you see that their acceptance to technology as one of the solutions, right? It's a vehicle. It's at the beginning, pre-COVID, it was always looked at as, technology should not take the place of a teacher. But who said that? Of course, the teacher will always have an amazing role, but technology just makes it more accessible, just makes it more scalable, just helps a lot.
It's no longer a disruptor, it's an enabler.
Exactly. And I think this is where we can even bridge, because you mentioned something about displaced children or children that are in refugee situations or camps, or I think with technology, we can bridge that gap, because if they have equal access to education using products and platforms like Lamsa, we can bridge that gap, Chris. If Absolutely. They get exposed to the same level of early childhood development that someone's sitting in kind of like, North America in a classroom that's very, advanced. If you have a child in somewhere, you bridge that gap, and that person can actually, become a scholar, can get accepted into university, can become a scientist himself. We're currently working with a NASA scientist on developing a space education framework for children for early childhood development. I think it's the first of its kind. And that scientist comes from a background where he had very limited access to education. And today he's one of NASA's top scientists. And because of the background that he comes from, he's very passionate about education. So we've been over the last few months developing the first framework to teach kids about sciences and get them interested in space and space matters for children as young as your daughter, Chris.
Wow. That's incredible. I guess
that's the power of education. That's the power of, and I think that's how we can bridge the gap. It's democratize these things. So, I spin the point back to you. I think it is actually a solution. The more that we democratize it, the more that we make it accessible, the cheaper we make it, the more accessible, we're actually making a huge impact.
No, I believe you. I'm power to you, man. How can I help? So excited. Let's do it, man.
Definitely
But
do stuff together, man.
yeah, man. I'm just I love what you guys stand for. I love what you do.
Like, I'll just give you a small final note. So you probably know a gentleman called Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, of course.
So now over the last few weeks and months with everything that's happening online, Deepak and I have been debating and discussing the importance of well-being for children in this world. So yes, they're studying online, they're spending 8, 9, 10 hours online. What does that do to their well-being? Are we looking at, bullying, right? There's a lot of cyberbullying that's happening, right? So a lot of these things that used to happen physically and we knew how to deal with them, now we're starting to see a shift. There's lots of bullying happening online. There's lots of depression. There's lots of, there's so many things related to well-being happening now, to a point where, Deepak and I said that, he's got the the Chopra Foundation. We're starting to develop a well-being program for children to help them cope with this new norm, which is new to all of us. And even traditional well-being programs were not designed for this time and place. So I think we have to be holistic in our approach. We have to look at, yes, taking them to space and teaching about space, but let's not also forget their well-being and their happiness, and making sure that we deal with their emotions the right way. We channel them. We help them, discover themselves, so it requires a lot of empathy, Chris.
Yeah. I think that's an incredible kind of challenge to try to solve, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that I think technology is the enabler, and having the right approach that is 360, not just based on informing or knowledge, but also a healthy mind, is absolutely something that definitely I think should be adopted for young kids. I mean, if you can start, respecting and understanding and teaching a person how to take care of their mind and take care of their, and be empathetic to their feelings, their personalities, etc., and they grow with that mindset. I think a lot of us would be very different today if we had that. But on that note, I'm gonna leave this call and I'm gonna go join my daughter for dinner at 6:30 almost, and I couldn't be happier to have that as an excuse to end my day. But that I appreciate the conversation we had. It was amazing. Thanks so much for taking the time. And,
thank you, Chris.
And hopefully I'll make the trip to Abu Dhabi and I'll come see you and we'll catch up in person at some point soon enough.
Thank you
Badr.
so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Badr.